As soon as he heard the door open, Jezal knew who his visitor must be. He did not even have to look up. Who else would have the temerity to barge into a king's own chambers without so much as knocking? He cursed silently, but with great bitterness. It could only be Bayaz, his jailer, his chief tormentor, his ever-present shadow, the man who had destroyed half the Agriont and made a ruin of beautiful Adua, and now smiled and revelled in the applause as though he were the saviour of the nation. It was enough to make a man sick to the pit of his guts. Jezal ground his teeth, staring out of the window towards the ruins, refusing to turn round. More demands, more compromises, more talk of what had to be done. Being the head of state, at least with the first of the Magi at his shoulder, was an endlessly frustrating and disempowering experience. Getting his own way on even the tiniest of issues, an almost impossible struggle. Wherever he looked, he found himself staring directly into the Magus's disapproving frown. He felt like nothing more than a figurehead. A fine-looking, a gilded, a magnificent, yet utterly useless chunk of wood. Except a figurehead at least gets to go at the front of the ship. "Your Majesty," came the old man's voice, the usual thin veneer of respect scarcely concealing the hard body of disdain beneath. "What now?" Jezal finally turned to face him. He was surprised to see that the Magus had shed his robes of state in favour of his old travel-stained coat, the heavy boots he had worn on their ill-fated journey into the ruined West. "Going somewhere?" asked Jezal, hardly daring even to hope. "I am leaving Adua, today." Today? It was the most Jezal could do to stop himself leaping in the air and screaming for joy. He felt like a prisoner stepping from his stinking dungeon and into the bright sunlight of freedom. Now he could rebuild the Agriont as he saw fit. He could reorganize the closed council, pick his own advisers, perhaps even rid himself of that witch of a wife Bayaz had saddled him with. He would be free to do the right thing, whatever that was. He would be free to try and find out what the right thing might be, at least. Was he not the High King of the Union, after all? Who would refuse him? "We will be sorry to lose you, of course." "I can imagine. There are some arrangements that we must make first, however." "By all means." Anything if it meant he was rid of the old bastard. "I have spoken with your new Archlector, Glocta." The name alone produced a shiver of revulsion. "Have you indeed?" "A sharp man. He has greatly impressed me. I have asked him to speak in my stead while I am absent from the closed council." "Truly?" asked Jezal, wondering whether to toss the cripple from his post directly after the Magus left the gates, or to leave it a day. "I would recommend," said in very much the tone of an order, "that you listen closely to his opinions." "Oh, I will, of course. The best of luck on your journey back to—" "I would like you, in fact, to do as he says." A cold knot of anger pressed at Jezal's throat. "You would have me, in effect, obey him?" Bayaz's eyes did not deviate from his own. "In effect, yes." Jezal was left momentarily speechless. For the Magus to suppose that he could come and go as he pleased, leaving his maimed lackey in charge, above a king in his own kingdom, the overwhelming arrogance of the man. "You have taken a high hand of late in my affairs," he snapped. "I am in no mind to trade one overbearing adviser for another." "That man will be very useful to you, to us. Decisions will have to be made that you would find difficult. Actions will have to be taken which you would rather not take yourself. People who would live in sparkling palaces need others willing to carry away their ordure, lest it pile up in the polished corridors and one day bury them. All this is simple and obvious. You have not attended to me." "No, you are the one who has failed to attend. Sandan Glocta, that crippled bastard." He realized his unfortunate choice of words, but had to forge on regardless, growing angrier than ever. "Sitting beside me at the closed council, leering over my shoulder every day of my life, and now you would have him dictate to me? Unacceptable! Insufferable! Impossible! We are no longer in the time of Herod the Great. I have no notion of what causes you to suppose that you could speak to me in such a manner. I am king here, and I refuse to be steered." Bayaz closed his eyes and drew a slow breath through his nose, quite as though he were trying to find the patience for the education of a moron. "You cannot understand what it is to live as long as I have, to know all that I know. You people are dead in the blink of an eye and have to be taught the same old lessons all over again. The same lessons that Juvens taught Stolicus 1,000 years ago. It becomes extremely tiresome." Jezal's fury was steadily building. "I apologize if I bore you." "I accept your apology." "I was joking." "Ah, your wit is so very sharp I hardly noticed I was cut." "You mock me." "It is easily done. Every man seems a child to me. When you reach my age, you see that history moves in circles. So many times I have guided this nation back from the brink of destruction and on to ever greater glory. And what do I ask in return? A few little sacrifices? If you only understood the sacrifices that I have made on behalf of you cattle." Jezal stabbed one finger furiously towards the window. "And what of all those dead? What of all those who have lost everything? Those cattle, as you put it. Are they happy with their sacrifices, do you suppose? What of all those who have suffered from this illness, that still suffer? My own close friend among them. I cannot but notice it seems similar to that illness you described to us in ruined Alcus. I cannot help thinking that your magic might be the cause." The Magus made no effort to deny it. "I deal in the momentous. I cannot concern myself with the fate of every peasant. Neither can you. I have tried to teach you this, but it seems you have failed to learn the lesson." "You are mistaken. I refuse to learn it." Now was his chance. Now, while he was angry enough, for Jezal to step forever from the shadow of the first of the Magi and stand a free man. Bayaz was poison, and he had to be cut out. "You helped me to my throne, and for that I thank you, but I do not care for your brand of government. It smacks of tyranny." Bayaz narrowed his eyes. "Government is tyranny. At its best, it is dressed in pretty colors." "Your callous disregard for the lives of my subjects. I will not stand for it. I have moved beyond you. You are no longer wanted here, no longer needed. I will find my own way from now on." He waved Bayaz away with what he hoped was a regal gesture of dismissal. "You may leave." "May I, indeed?" The first of the Magi stood in silence for a long time, his frown growing darker and darker. Long enough for Jezal's rage to begin to wilt, for his mouth to go dry, for his knees to feel weak. "I perceive that I have been far too soft with you," said Bayaz, each word sharp as a razor cut. "I have coddled you like a favorite grandchild, and you have grown willful, a mistake that I shall not make again. A responsible guardian should never be shy with the whip." "I am a son of kings," snarled Jezal. "I will not—" He was doubled over by a spear of pain through his guts, stunningly sudden. He tottered a step or two, scalding vomit spraying from his mouth. He crashed onto his face, scarcely able even to breathe, his crown bouncing off and rolling away into the corner of the room. He had never known agony like it, not a fraction of it. "I have no notion of what causes you to suppose that you could speak to me in such a manner. To me, the first of the Magi." Jezal heard Bayaz's footsteps thumping slowly towards him, voice picking at his ears as he squirmed helplessly in his own sick. "Son of kings? I am disappointed after all that we have been through together, that you would so readily believe the lies I have spread on your behalf. That nonsense was meant for the idiots in the streets, but it seems that idiots in palaces are lulled by sweet slop just as easily. I bought you from a whore. You cost me 6 marks. She wanted 20, but I drive a hard bargain." The words were painful, of course, but far, far worse was the unbearable stabbing that cut up Jezal's spine, that tore at his eyes, burned his skin, seared the very roots of his hair, and made him thrash like a frog in boiling water. I had others waiting, of course. I know better than to trust all to one throw of the dice. Other sons of mysterious parentage ready to step into the role. There was a family called Brint, as I recall, and plenty more besides. But you floated to the top, Jezal, like a turd in the bath. When I crossed that bridge into the Agriont and saw you groan, I knew you were the one. You simply looked right, and you can't teach that. You have even come to speak like a king, which is a bonus I never expected." Jezal moaned and slobbered, unable even to scream. He felt Bayaz's boot slide under him and kick him over onto his back. The Magus's scowling face loomed down towards him, blurred by tears. "But if you insist on being difficult, if you insist on going your own way, well, there are other options. Even kings die unexplained deaths. Thrown by a horse, choked on an olive pit, long falls to the hard, hard cobblestones, or simply found dead in the morning. Life is always short for you insects, but it can be very short for those who are not useful. I made you out of nothing, out of air. With a word, I can unmake you." Bayaz snapped his fingers, and the sound was like a sword through Jezal's stomach. "Like that you can be replaced." The first of the Magi leaned down further. "Now, dolt, bastard, son of a whore, consider carefully your answers to these questions. You will do as your arch-lector advises, yes?" The cramps relaxed a merciful fraction, enough for Jezal to whisper, "Yes." "You will be guided by him in all things?" "Yes." "You will abide by his orders in public and in private?" "Yes," he gasped. "Yes." "Good," said the Magus, straightening up, towering over Jezal as his statue had once towered over the people on the Kingsway. "I knew that you would say so because, although I know you are arrogant, ignorant, and ungrateful, I know this also. You are a coward. Remember that. I trust that this is one lesson you will not ignore." The agony ebbed suddenly away, enough for Jezal to lift his spinning head from the tiles. "I hate you," he managed to croak. Bayaz spluttered with laughter. "Hate me? The arrogance of you, to suppose that I might care. I, Bayaz, first apprentice of great Juvans. I, who threw down the Master-Maker, who forged the Union, who destroyed the 100 Words." The Magus slowly lifted his foot and planted it on the side of Jezal's jaw. "I don't care whether you like me, fool." He ground Jezal's face into the vomit-spattered floor with his boot. "I care that you obey, and you will, yes?" "Yes," Jezal slobbered through his squashed mouth. "Then, Your Majesty, I take my leave. Pray that you never give me cause to return." The crushing pressure on his face released, and Jezal heard the Magus's footsteps tap away to the far side of the room. The door creaked open and then clicked firmly shut. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, his breath heaving quickly in and out. After a while, he drew up the courage to roll over, dragged himself dizzily up to his hands and knees. There was an unpleasant stink, and not just from the vomit smeared across his face. He realized with a meager flicker of shame that he had soiled himself. He crawled across to the window, still limp as a wrung-out rag, drew himself gasping up to his knees, and looked down into the chilly gardens. It only took a moment for Bayaz to come into view, striding down the gravel path between the neat lawns, the back of his bald pate shining. Yoru Sulphur walked behind him, staff in one hand, a box of dark metal held under the other arm. The same box that had followed Jezal and Logan and Pharaoh in a cart across half the circle of the world. What happy days those seemed now. Bayaz stopped, suddenly, turned, raised his head. He looked up, straight towards the window. Jezal pressed himself into the hangings with a whimper of terror, his whole body trembling, the after-image of that unbearable pain still stamped cold as ice into his guts. The first of the Magi stood there for a moment longer, the faintest hint of a smile on his face. Then he turned away smartly, strode between the bowing knights of the body flanking the gate, and was gone. Jezal knelt there, clinging to the curtains like a child to his mother. He thought about how happy he had once been, and how little he had realized it. Playing cards, surrounded by friends, a bright future ahead of him. He dragged in a heavy breath, the tightness of tears creeping up his throat, spreading out around his eyes. Never in his life had he felt so alone. Son of kings? He had no one and nothing. He spluttered and sniffed. His vision grew blurry. He shook with hopeless sobs, his scarred lip trembling, the tears dripping down and spattering on the tiles. He wept with pain and fear, with shame and anger, with disappointment and helplessness. But Bayaz had been right. He was a coward. So most of all, he wept with relief.